Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. Rumours are emerging from the Formula 1 paddock that a strong majority of existing teams are willing to reject effectively any new entrant to the sport, especially the Andretti Cadillac new Formula 1 team they're trying to form over the last few days. But is the reason behind this all that meets the eye? Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. This has been a story over the last few days as soon as Andretti announced this partnership with General Motors to partner up with the Cadillac brand to enter into Formula 1. Now, some teams aren't so convinced this is a good idea. The FIA, the governing body, is pushing heavily for this. Formula 1, the management group, doesn't seem so convinced, neither do the teams. Is this, though, the teams actually having a good reason for this? Is this them trying to push back against the FIA? That's one of the key questions. We knew that this, just because it was kind of on the table, was far from a guarantee. There is a process involved in terms of, okay, the FIA opens the table for entrants to come through. They put their bids in, they bring their partnerships to the table, and then FIA, the Formula 1 management, and also the teams, they debate and decide whether they think it's worthwhile. The key thing the teams don't like is the fact that the prize money is distributed between the teams. If you bring a new team in, it kind of lowers that amount that gets paid out. Therefore, the team would have to pay $200 million effectively to enter because of that reason. But nowadays, the teams say, well, you know, Formula 1's grown a fair bit. You've got to pay more than $200 million. So there's some debate to be had on that. But even just the entry fee isn't enough. They've got to tick all the boxes in terms of being, having the amount of resources, having the kind of, competitive, let's just say, tenure and pedigree to compete at this level in the sports. Andretti are confident. They've stated, look, we've done a lot of hiring. We've brought in a technical director. They've got the partnership with Cadillac, but still the teams are not convinced at all. So much so that we saw this statement yesterday from the head of the FIA, the president, where he says, yeah, I'm surprised by the adverse reaction. We should be pushing for this. Of course, it's in the FIA's best interest, more exposure, more money from the teams. Whether Formula 1 agree, I don't know. I would like to see an 11th team. I think a lot of fans would, but there are reasons why this is always going to be a struggle. But again, he makes a fair point about the fact that Haas, a couple of years ago, allowing them into the sport, tried a smaller team. That made sense. Even Alfa Tauri or, Toro Rosso as it was before when they came in, and even Caterham several years ago. There's been some entrants to the sport. Nowadays, so many teams would love to enter. It's simply a matter of, it's not a matter of do they have the money to survive. It's more about whether the sport thinks or the teams actually think it's a good idea. And this is, one of the key hurdles that these teams will have to deal with, and also any other potential entrants will have to deal with. And it may be down to a power struggle, really, between the teams and the FIA, rather than any real criticism of their actual entry. So this is what the FIA is trying to push this pretty hard. The teams aren't so in agreement about this, right? And even Ben Sulayem goes on to say that they can have up to 12 teams on the grid. I think the regulations state that they're potentially allowed up to 13, as in, I think they're allowed 26 cars on the grid, but I guess realistically what he's saying here is it's possible in 2026 they've got 12 teams. I think that is highly unlikely based on what we are seeing happen here over the last couple of days and the kind of adverse reaction to this, and Toto Wolff gives his own thoughts. First of all, a quick note on apparently a strong majority of teams are against expanding the grid. This certainly, for now, includes Mercedes, as we'll see Toto Wolff's perspective here in a second, and also this I thought was an interesting statement that the General Motors partnership is a badging exercise rather than a full manufacturer commitment. Now, whether at this point the teams are just making up reasons to reject this entry or whether this is a fair point, but even Formula 1's CEO, right, Stefano Domenicali, the head over there, I think he was asked this question back in September. They stated that expanding beyond 10 teams, he said at the time, was not a priority. Of course, the disadvantage for the teams is expanding the grid dilutes the share of revenues. So the idea is really a new team has to prove that they can expand and grow the sport beyond what the existing teams would lose by that revenue dilution. Yes, there's that $200 million entry fee, but of course that, it's kind of a one-off type thing. Down the line, that new addition would have to expand the grid in terms of revenue and exposure, this type of stuff. Now, let's be honest here. Formula 1 is moving heavily into America. There are already 3 F1 races in America on the calendar next year. There's Miami, there's Texas at Austin, the Circuit of the Americas, and then there's Las Vegas right in November next year. So there's already 3 races out there. The American audience is growing year on year, and an American team wants to come in, Andretti Cadillac, with an American, General Motors, with an American driver. It all points towards massive positive for Formula 1 if they can be competitive. But the teams, for whatever reason, you guys can discuss in the comment, are still not convinced. And even back at Miami, right, Toto Wolff also said, we've got to make sure that we're limiting the amount of franchises and we don't want to dilute that value by adding new teams in. But it's not not just Toto Wolff and Mercedes, it's the other top teams presumably as well, but also whoever on the grid. I mean, strong majority, what is that? 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 at minimum, right? Strong majority says pretty much every single one, apart from maybe, you know, Haas might be down. Given they're also American, smaller team, think that might make a fair bit of sense as well. These are Toto Wolff's follow-up comments on here, a couple of different angles to this. His first comment is this: I think Andretti is a fantastic brand, and they have shown in many other series they can be competitive. What I've said before is, what can you add to the show? So it's quite the statement really from Toto Wolff. I mean, he said this before, and now I thought Andretti had come in and said, hey, look, we're partnering up with Cadillac, we're partnering here with General Motors, we've got the OEM support, we've got the kind of American heritage, like this makes perfect sense, which I think it probably does. But still, Toto Wolff is not convinced, the other teams are seemingly still not convinced, and maybe you can understand why. We saw a second ago, right, those discussions around a badging exercise, that are General Motors really that committed, or is it like, you know, they throw Cadillac on, but the reality is Andretti's doing a fair bit of it themselves, and therefore, you know, they're not going to be that competitive, the reality is. And okay, fair enough, the teams might have their concerns about that, and I think understandably so, because as I say, if Andretti can't come through and, you know, turn a corner, be a competitive team, expand the sport in America, then, you know, it doesn't really make sense for the other teams. But not sure that fully checks out. Now, he actually goes on to say the following. Some interesting statements, because what he's saying here is effectively what Andretti are doing. He says that, you know, privately owned teams nowadays, let's just say a Williams or something, it's difficult to make it work nowadays, especially for a new team, to get on your feet, be successful, because the odds are against you, stating that, you know, most other teams, Sauber, now Audi is coming through, and, you know, Williams and Haas are kind of private teams, but still, if a team wants to do that, then partnering up with an OEM is the way to go, which is pretty much what Andretti are doing here with Cadillac. Then going on to say, if we were to add an American team, I'm absolutely up for it, but what are you bringing? What are you bringing to the show? Because the team needs to be up at the front with an American driver, and that is super good for all of us. So he admits, right, American team, American driver, be competitive, and, you know, it's a win-win. But I guess he wants them to prove that they can be that competitive, I suppose. That's the argument. So kind of difficult to read into exactly why the teams are so against this, and there's such a strong majority against it, and that does bring the question towards, is there more going on than just the particular arguments against Andretti Cadillac, or is this more so against any potential expansion due to frustrations against the FIA? We've heard many stories over the last year or so, really, even a couple of years at this point, between the Formula One teams, Formula One management, the way the FIA is run, on various issues, various governance issues, whether that's, you know, actual racing instant type stuff and consistency, whether that's budget cap enforcement or whatever, whether that's even, you know, Hamilton and his ear piercings or whatever they were trying to clamp down on last season, whether that's discussions around expressions of belief the drivers are not happy with, whether that's around, you know, racing in certain countries they're not so happy with in light of those situations. There's been a lot of drama and friction really between the governing body and the sport, and you know, Chris Medland believes it's not necessarily because they have a valid argument against the case of Andretti Cadillac, it's more so they don't want to be dictated to by the FIA. As Chris Medland says, I don't believe it's that they don't want Andretti, because, you know, Toto Wolff has said Andretti, great pedigree, you know, done a lot of great things in many different sports, or motorsports at least, so, you know, why not get them in? Obviously, you know, he gives some reasons that are kind of vague as to why he doesn't want them in, but Chris Medland believes maybe it's that they don't want to be dictated to by the FIA, because obviously the FIA wants it, that's been made very clear over the last few days, or any team saying it wants in, especially as multiple new teams right now are keen. The terms need to work for all existing parties, just like in any other sports, whoever the team is. Agree on that one, but yeah, is there more going on here than just a simple case of they have a valid argument against Andretti, and it's more of a power struggle, which is going to keep Andretti out despite all their positive work? So it's unfortunate for fans. I know there's going to be some frustration here against the teams, because, you know, it's not just Toto Wolff and Mercedes, it's apparently a strong majority of the grid are also against this expansion, but it's kind of tough from a fan's perspective to really see a valid reason why. And okay, there's a few ones we discussed in the video, but nothing major that stands out really, but there's probably more going on than meets the eye at surface level. So tweet your thoughts in the comment section below. Just two quick things to mention also on Toto Wolff discussing Lewis Hamilton's contract. I'm sure that Hamilton is looking at Alonso and thinking, damn, this guy is still going. Like, of course, Alonso was first on the grid in, what, 2001, and he's still going 22 years later. Kind of crazy to think about. And that actually means, I think it was maybe a month or two between Alonso's first race in Formula One and Oscar Piastri being born, which is kind of remarkable. That might be the first time it's ever happened. Maybe not, but it's got to be one of the only times that there's been a driver on the grid with another driver on the grid, as one of which was born while the other one was still racing in Formula One. But Toto Wolff has kind kind of confirmed that the deal that ends for Hamilton at the end of 2023 is going to get extended, or something like that is going to happen over the coming days. And even I thought this is crazy because he's been in Antarctica over the last few days, and here he is just on his own running in the Antarctic, some sort of like snowstorms going on. We've got penguins, we've got like the sea lions in the background, like absolutely crazy stuff. So, you know, honestly, this is really awesome to be fair. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are new, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.